Hi, Ian. It's David. I hope it's okay to answer this way. It makes it easier for me, and that way I can give full responses quickly, and you get, sort of the full answers. And also, this is the first time I've read the questions, so this is my first earnest and honest reactions and sort of thoughts that come to mind. So here I go. Um, in your Exodus metaphor, you compared the Israelites wandering through the desert to the current state of media and journalism. In that comparison, you mentioned specifically making unleavened bread as an adaptation that the Jewish people implemented as a means to adapt their practices for survival in the desert, and you mentioned that people in the media would have to make similar choices. Could you provide me with a few examples of those kinds of adaptations or choices happening in the world of media right now or in the near future? Sure. So, and one thing, obviously, I don't want to extend the analogy too far. I don't want to say like unleavened bread is like X, right? They're obviously very two distinct situations, but the idea that they had to make changes, and they had to make choices about what they wanted to keep or not. So, for example, I think most conversations about journalism ethics, ethics are things that journalists want to keep, right? Or the idea of, I mean, even think about the reporter, right? The position of the reporter as the person who collects information, whether they collect information with boots on the ground or on a desk on a phone. I think that's something that people have wanted to keep. Meanwhile, again, not making a direct analogy here, but and again, I'm not like a religious scholar, but I believe the Israelites made chuppahs, which are like kind of like tents, like nomadic tents that you could break down really quickly and put up somewhere else. Um, and like think about like the social media editor. That's a completely like that tent was completely new, right? It's made for being on the go, and the social media editor is completely about is a role about the disintermediation, right? That role exists because publishers or publications are no longer publishers, but work with publishers, and so they need someone in that role who can um, be the hinge between the content they produce and the content that they publish, right? So, I think there's a ton of examples like this that we can think about, right? But like the social media editor, which is a perfectly normal job title now, didn't exist before. And I also think that there are things like ethics which are changing, right? Like how does ethics apply to virtual reality? How does ethics apply to drones or etc.? These are things that I think people want to hold on to or want to take with them, even in an unleavened scenario. And I'm not saying that the ethics have become unleavened, but like I think there are things that people want to hold on to. Hopefully that answers your question. During your time at AJ Plus, you and your team utilized focus groups to generate data to construct member profiles that helped you in the process of shaping content from the outlet. Did you utilize any other research methods to build these profiles, and how did shaping content to fit the member profiles fit into AJ Plus's model of creating platform-specific content? So I think the question to your answer is, did you utilize any other research methods to build these profiles? Is yes. And we had actually worked with an outside consultant. I forget her name right now. She was a journalism business professor out of Michigan or Northwestern. I can't remember. Um, and she went with a kind of user-centric, human-centric design kind of approach of like observing people and their natural behaviors and what they wanted to do, again, across those demographics. Um, and then again, all pitches early on, they had to be like directed at one of these profiles. So if you and you'd have to say which platform you were pitching it for, right? Like this is a Facebook video for and about, and here's why it's good for and here's why it's good for Facebook. Um, the platform was part of the pitch, and we also did think of the different profiles. The two female profiles were more Facebook, and then the male profile was more of a YouTube consumer. So we did think that wasn't a rule. It wasn't like any pitch for YouTube had to be for the male uh, profile, but that was kind of built into their personality, as well as again it was built into our pitches as to what platform you were creating it for. As we move, next question. As we move forward into the digital age, how do you see branded content fitting into the new ecosystem? Do you agree with Jonah Peretti in the idea that the forms of traditional message delivery, i.e., TV, radio, etc., will die off and the internet will ultimately win out above all the other platforms? If so, how do brands need to adapt to this new reality? Is native branded content the best angle for brands to pursue? Should media outlets be concerned about the blending of branded and journalistic content, or should that practice be embraced? So there's a few questions here, and I actually have contradictory answers. So the first thing on branded content fitting the new ecosystem, I do think branded content is part of the ecosystem. I think it will continue to be part of the ecosystem. I have no qualms with it as long as it is transparent when something is branded. That's the main, I think, and that doesn't necessarily mean that there's like a specific, in the upper right hand corner. It's, it just has to be obvious to a plain reader that something is sponsored, essentially. And funny enough, I agree and disagree with Jonah Peretti. I agree with Peretti that traditional message delivery, TV, radio, etc., will die off, and that the internet will eventually win out above all these other platforms. But funny enough, I actually think television understood branded content better than the internet did, right? Like, think about what a commercial was, right? Like, or I should say this, I think of this as native advertising, but branded content and native advertising, to me, are two words that mean the same thing, essentially. Although I'd be interested if somebody had a distinction there. But I'm going to use the word native content, because, native content being all the rage, and like, the problem with advertising on the internet is that it is not native. It's like, a banner ad stuck next to what is native, right? Native means of the same nature to me, right? So, I mean, think about what a commercial is. You're watching a little show, and then in the middle of the show, right, a little mini show comes up, right? Like a 30-second show or 40. Like, commercials are just like quick little shows, right? I mean, as they got more sophisticated too, right? Like, think about the best, right? Mentos, right? Like, oh, there's drama. Is they going to figure it out? Oh, they figured out Mentos, right? It's a little show. Just like the bigger show that you're watching. It's obvious that it was paid for by Mentos, but it should be of the same nature, light, entertaining, right? And again, that Mentos was probably for a sitcom, right? Like, for a more hardcore, serious show, you'd have a more hardcore, serious advertisement that was of the same, native to that kind of audience. And then, imagine if you watched a sitcom and instead of having little interruptions from little shows, they just, like, a little thing came up on the screen and started flashing, right, in the middle of Seinfeld. That would be really annoying. That's not how television approached it. They really approached this idea. I think it was because there was a scarcity there was a greater scarcity of content, and so attention was a little bit more focused. But branded content or native content to me is a little bit more along the lines of great commercials than banner ads that, like, or the really annoying pop-up, right, is like the exact opposite. Because it's like, what is this doing here? Get this away from me as soon as possible. But yeah, it did get my attention for a bit, but I hate you for it, and it didn't belong here. So that is, I think, the way I think about brands adapting to this new reality is that they need to create compelling content. They always have, right? I mean, again, that's, great brands that created great commercials, right? And, look at the history of, again, television commercials. They need to think about, obviously not make commercials for the web because the web doesn't have that same kind of flow, but they need to create great content that can be shared and understood. That's why you see brands now on Twitter, right? Like I think recently the Wendy's Twitter account has gotten a lot of, like, kudos for being snarky and sassy or whatever. But that's them creating content, right? That is native to Twitter. That's what you do on Twitter. Should media, so let me just keep reading to make sure I answered all of this. Should media outlets be concerned about the blending of branded and journalistic content, or should the practice be embraced? They should only be concerned about the blending of branded and journalistic content if those things truly blend. And again, I want to make sure I'm being clear here. Branded content or native content that is transparent, that is factual. It doesn't have to be factual, right? But if it is, great. I don't know if I'd call it journalistic. Journalism should be factual and accurate, and should not be itself, tied to a selling a product. You can have brands that do journalistic work. I think I even mentioned on our car, and correct me if I could be wrong on this, but I think the ACLU was the first organization to really blow the whistle on Guantanamo Bay, right? So and that was I consider that a work of journalism, if I'm correct on this, and I think I am. And I'm sure we can come up with other examples of a brand or a company, not a traditional journalistic company, doing something journalistic which serves their mission. And I think that that's fine. Again, it was transparent that it was from the ACLU. Is the ACLU um, a perfect journalism organization? No, they certainly have their agenda, which isn't even journalism. Their agenda is about protecting rights and liberties, but they did this work of journalism in furtherance of that mission. And I think weaker missions, right, like selling a product, would only result in weaker journalistic efforts, right, and would be taken as such. And as long as the brand that is funding it is the brand that is sharing the information, I'm fine with it, right? Like if Tesla, I'll use Tesla, right, hires an investigative reporter about the environmental whatevers of Ford, I would be fine with that as long as it's Tesla that's publishing it. If Tesla funds it and the Wall Street Journal publishes it without us knowing that it was Tesla, I would have serious qualms, right? That's that line of like, is it transparent who funded it? The Wall Street Journal can certainly do that reporting, funded by the Wall Street Journal. That would be great. And Tesla can do that reporting, funded by Tesla, but I need to know. I don't ever want to be in a situation, or I think it would be wrong if we're in a situation where a brand funds it that has certain goals and missions that are not transparent to me, or that it's not obvious that that's the brand that funded it. Again, I think I was a long-winded way of saying the same thing, and I think it was clear. Let me know if you have any other questions. Hopefully all this made sense.